We're just chilling, watching some MCD1, more collect designs on YouTube. Just kind of inspired some of the packaging. I like this dude's style, so kind of motivated a little bit. Time to get back on this project, and one thing that I've been putting off is trying to figure out gearing options, pinion options, looking at the manual and trying to understand the whole overdrive setup with these stealth transmissions. So we're gonna have to bust out the manual to understand the overdrives. We might end up inversing it and overdriving the front and making the front the rear. And to get a little speed in this thing, we picked up a Hobby Wing Easy Run brushless system combo. Let's take a peek at this thing. 5400 kV on the motor and a 60 amp ESC. I have no idea how the gearing is going to work on this thing. Gonna have to figure something out. So we're going to start with the stock pinion, figure out the packaging on the ESC, get the motor mounted up, and try to figure out some pinions and see if it just straight grenades the gearbox or what. We're gonna maybe even try to inverse the gearbox and overdrive the front and run the front to the rear inversed. So I have to get the manual out to actually make sense of that though, so let's peep that right now. God dude, I had to look at this for 20 minutes to figure out what I was looking at. So we're gonna attempt to run this in the stock configuration with the mount facing rear, and we're gonna run no overdrive, and that's gonna be a 52, 52, and a 28, 28. Let's crack into this and see if we can find those gears. And until we can confirm that this gear ratio is actually gonna work, that's why we're just gonna wait to get some metal gears in this thing. Once we figure out pinions and gearing and make sure it has enough wheel speed, let's bust the manual out right now and just make sure. The manual looks to be a 28, 28 and a 52, 52. So we're just gonna remove the 53 and the 28 and pop these in. Going to be the bottom one, so both gears closer to the spur gear are the ones that are going to come out. And with that, we put in a 28 and a 52, giving this a 1-to-1 no overdrive ratio, so that as we spin the spur, these two holes will stay lined up. So we're running no overdrive. And my only issue with the motor is that I had to run 2 washers to compensate because the screw holes weren't deep enough to take the 8 mils that came stock on the Element. Starting to kind of second guess using this body a little bit. I feel like by the time we keep cutting stuff off of here, it's not going to be a whole lot left. I've been chopping on this thing, trying to get it to just barely even sit. Chopped a huge the whole center console and then out to here just to accept that transmission. Crazy dude, I gotta chop the shit out of these seats. I gotta basically like around these things like that. We're just freestyling, bro. Get your freestyle on. Watch your fingers. Something like that maybe. And then I'll just trim this up, basically follow the tape line. So we've just been steady chopping the interior, just trying to make room for everything. And we still have to do a really big cut on the back to make room for the battery back here. And it's gonna protrude in the interior, but still kind of, you know, second guessing running this. We just got this stuff mounted in there temporarily right now, just on Velcro. But the cool thing about Velcro is that the majority of the time, if you can hold this stuff in with like body parts, it gives a little bit, you know, when you wreck hella bad, and it makes for great video because shit yard sales everywhere. Got some drive shaft cogging at droop because it's fully drooped right now. So what we can do is we can bring it out of droop to like ride height, which should probably be right about there.
Drive shaft's definitely not straight.
Make sure you don't got any drive shaft that's rubbing at full bump, and then we'll do the same thing at full droop. Good to go. What we ended up doing late last night is just throwing on the exterior shell to these 3D printed mounts, and then just drove it around just for a second to make sure that it was working. And like I said, probably gonna have to put a bigger pinion in it because that was pretty ripping. So yeah, no oil in the shocks, no problem picking up the front end. I mean, the weight distribution is way to the rear. So I'm gonna pick it up dead center on the skid plate. I mean, it's, and that's basically just from having, you know, the battery and the weights and the axle weights. I don't know if I'm gonna support this these 3D printed mounts. I got these on eBay, and I'm just, you know, the print qualities are not that great, so we'll see actually if they hold up. We got no oil in the shocks, and the spring rates are all off, so we got so much preload loaded into these things, the collar's almost all the way down. Next thing is try to hack this up, make some room for that rear battery, start building the interior up, get some more components, getting close. Boom, here's a little update. We got the bed chopped up. Pain in the ass to Dremel that out, and then it melted. I was just using a cutting wheel, and then I had to cut the melt. If you get the melt before it gets crazy, you can actually get it off pretty clean, but it turned into a big old mess. I had to get back in there with just a razor X-Acto knife, clean it up. And we had to chop a bunch to actually make room for the battery tray, which is sitting on that rear shock tower now. And that was one of the things that I didn't really go into about the CG and the weight distribution. So trying to get all the weight to the rear by moving the battery to the back, and by also adding some of these brass weights and axle weights. You know, the sprung versus unsprung weight is a whole nother thing, but with all the weight in the body, I think we just needed something to keep it, you know, level in the back. Definitely runs. So this is what we're working on, figuring out, getting that front fender to clear. And interior is going to be a whole nother thing to try to make this work, but I just sit here, just straight visualizing underneath here, and kind of like clipped into the back through this little clip. And those would have sat, well, let's get the left one. Those would have sat like right here, flush on the edge, something like that. So the stock seats just weren't going to work because we ended up cutting so far in that we just didn't have any bracket for it, and there was just, you know, to make room for the transmission. In order to make room for the transmission, we had to cut a lot to actually clear, and also this rear battery mount. So the OG seats weren't going to work. And with these little Kydex panels that we made to mount with the floor pan, we're going to take these little PRP seats and mount them up and just use two pieces of hardware per seat and just hard mount them in. Well, so that was a big one, just not understanding how I was even gonna make that happen, but you know, we're not building a show car, so let's giddy up. I'll put the stock seat in the center, just so you can get kind of just a reference of where the original seat would have been, where the PRP buckets. Came out pretty good. So I'm thinking, like, other than this, the interior should be pretty straightforward as far as chopping, cutting, gluing. Unfortunately for all you scale fans out there, we're not going to be actually painting a lot of the interior components. I might do a couple in silver, I might do a couple in gold, but mainly we're just going to leave it black plastic for now. So we got the seats installed, moving on to the next step. Figured I'd save you guys the boringness of watching epoxy dry, so we got all the little accessories glued into the dashboard, got the steering wheel, steering column, got all the pedals and shifters glued in. And the only thing left is the tiltometer. So I'm just eyeballing this roll of tape again. For some reason I always find myself using these roll of tapes just to see if the radius is similar to the tire, which I mean it is, it's a clean line. So I'm just gonna take this piece of tape and then trace it, which we got a little circle template, which is roughly the size of the tire. I think we'll start with something like this. Probably get the body on the chassis and see where this needs to be. If it's like, you know, a little bit aft, you know, you can kind of do one of these, or you can kind of offset to the rear, somewhere up into there. And then I definitely want the bumpers probably to come off the front, like down like that. Bumped out, I think it's like, it's more forward than it is centered. So we'll do the best we can, see what happens. Well, look at there, for my first hack job. Well, Not too crazy. It's a pretty gnarly hawk job. One of the things that I ran into that I didn't look on the other side when I made my outside cut is that the brackets for the front headlight buckets in the front grille, this little metal part right here. I don't know, it's not bad for my first try, but get some sandpaper eventually, clean this up. It is gonna have an over fender just covering all that, so I don't know why I'm too worried about it, but I'm gonna mount this up and see what kind of clearance we got. Let's see how we did. Got a lot to go. A lot to go. It ain't fitting too good. It's gotta be straight up. Should I just cut straight on the straight line? Don't go all the way. So it's just, here's the interior so far. It's looking pretty good. Made some great progress on this thing. We got the interior pretty much buttoned up, got the PRP seats all mounted up, got our little carbon floor pans installed, all the interior components, and it's just at that stage where it's just, you know, kind of taking on a little personality of its own. So I guess one of the things that didn't come out as well as I could have done was probably chopping these fenders, and I probably could have planned a little bit better, but we ended up cutting into the bracket that's for the front bumper mount onto the body right here. There's just this little metal bracket that bolts on the inside of the body, and that just allows this front bumper clip to bolt in. It's one of the screws right here. So my original cut line, when we made this little paper template based on the wheel size that we were choosing. And I just kind of freestyled up front right here and just kind of went out the front, and I freestyled a little bit in the back and didn't follow my line as best that I could. But it turns out that the wheels are definitely still not gonna really fit all that well. So even with, this is one of the smallest 1.9s that I have, I am actually kind of been looking at different tire packages. Now, I love the way that this looks, but is that scale? I mean, that tire is freaking enormous compared to this body. So 40 on a 80s Toyota pickup truck is probably not the most realistic thing. But so if I do get another tire, do I really want to start cutting on other parts of the fenders based on that? Now, we don't have a whole lot left. It's bumping clean in there, and it's not, but the problem is that it rubs this way. It'll smoke this front bumper, and then full bump, same thing, it's hitting in the back right there. But besides not having a functional wheel and tire combo, it's looking pretty good. I'm pretty stoked on how the interior came out. And it is, hiding a full electronics package in here, so 60 amp EAC. I got to figure out where I'm going to mount the power button or the power switch. So it does actually have this other back piece that goes in place of the sway bar mount, and then that's where the rear bed will actually mount up to the rear. So let's get the bed kind of mocked up and see what that looks like. But the majority of the big chopping's done. We just got to figure out this rear fender for the tire size that we're going to choose, kind of clean up the front fender, and then figure out these fender flares. And here's a little progress update. We're just rough cutting these Proline Prerunner fenders, trying to kind of make something work here, and I feel like the track width's going to be pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I mean, we could cut the other fender to come out. I just don't want this thing to be like 20 feet wide, so. Cannot find my heat gun. So until I find a heat gun so I could actually get in here and give this a little kiss with some heat and get it reformed, I think we're just gonna probably build it up, take it for a spin.